Welcome to Investment Moments with Momentum Investments, where we talk to investment professionals and financial experts about investments and savings. We unpack all things investments to give you insights to help you achieve your financial goals. This series is aimed at equipping you as a South African consumer and investor to understand what is happening in the economy, locally and globally, and how this affects your daily cost of living and investments. Our focus for today will be on inflation. Joining me for this discussion is Tshiamo Masike, economist at Momentum Investments. Tshiamo, thank you for joining us today to unpack a topic that hits every South African: inflation.
Thank you for having me, Levashni.
We've all noticed how that 500 Rand doesn't stretch as far anymore at the shops, whether it's for pap, meat, or petrol. From skyrocketing veggie prices to fuel that won't stop yo-yoing, inflation affects our daily lives in big ways. And with unemployment over 30%, it's tough to understand why prices keep climbing. So, Tshiamo, let's dive into making sense of inflation by firstly answering, what is inflation?
And that's a very relevant question. So inflation is the general increase in the prices of goods and services. Let's make reference to what you just spoke about. Think of the 500 Rand, what that used to buy 3-4 years ago, that could probably fill a basket with groceries. But now it will fill much less. So what inflation generally does, it reduces our purchasing power. But it's not just groceries, it's also things like electricity, school fees, and fuel.
So anything that we consume, basically.
Yes.
Why do food items like meat and vegetables experience such volatile inflation?
And that is mainly because those food items the price of it is impacted by things that are out of our control. So think things like weather condition, think supply chains, think animal diseases. So we had the food inflation. If you have a drought or you have a flood, that affects the supply of crops. So then if supply decreases more than demand, then the price increases. And the inverse is true. Going to meat prices, we also saw that over the past couple of years, we've had prevalence of animal diseases. We had the avian flu, which has affected our poultry. We also did have the foot and mouth disease, which affected our cattle. So that affects the supply and thus in turn affects our prices. So that's why you see that volatility in those prices.
That makes a lot of sense. Why does the fuel price keep yo-yoing, and how does that ripple through to everything else?
I definitely do like the yo-yoing part. And if we look at fuel prices, they are impacted predominantly by two factors. So the international oil price and our currency, so the Rand. International oil prices feature in the fuel price because South Africa imports almost all of its crude oil. And if there's any price changes globally due to supply or demand, then that filters through to the amount of money that we pay at the petrol pumps. In terms of the Rand, because we import the oil in dollars, if the Rand depreciates, then the oil price becomes more expensive in Rand terms, thus making the full fuel price expensive. And then if it strengthens, then the oil price becomes less in Rand terms, which then leads to lower fuel prices. So that's why we have changes every month, so the yo-yoing. And fuel prices are quite important because they filter through in terms of production costs. So think they go private transport, public transport, and even air travel. Taking food to the shops, and that is why then when fuel increases, things like groceries also increase.
With unemployment over 30%, why do we still experience such high inflation?
That is an interesting question, Levashni, because you would expect that when the unemployment is high, then people don't have money, then they can't consume a lot of goods, right? But there are two factors to inflation. So you have the demand side of the economy. So when demand is high, then inflation goes higher. But you also have the cost side of the economy. So when costs are high, then it increases the price of goods and services. So you find that even though people are not working and they don't have money, there are cost push pressures. So high electricity prices, you have logistics that are not functioning properly, and your fuel prices that we just spoke about. So those are what can impact, even though unemployment is high. But again, in the context of South Africa, we have this high level of income inequality. So you do find that your high-level consumers have a lot of purchasing power. So they then do drive demand, and that's how then that can play through.
What can the Reserve Bank do to help?
A lot. So the Reserve Bank is mandated actually to keep prices stable, so to keep inflation in check. And they can do this because they do have a mandate, which is currently 3 to 6%, but they have signaled that they want to aim for 3%, so lower than what they were doing, 4.5%. How can they keep that in check? If inflation is going up, they can use the instrument of interest rates. So when inflation goes up, then they can increase interest rates. By increasing interest rates, that then reduces the money supply in the economy, which means less money, we're demanding less goods, and then inflation comes down. And the inverse is true. When inflation is lower, they can lower interest rates. That creates more money supply in the economy, with demand more, and then they can help keep inflation in check.
Tshiamo, that's all the questions I have for today. That's a wrap on today's episode. Thank you for your time and your insights.
It's a pleasure.
As South Africans, we can try to manage the impact of inflation on our personal finances, starting with budgeting smarter, tracking grocery prices, and shopping for deals when we can, or simply carpooling to combat high fuel prices. For more information from our macro research team on inflation, visit momentum.co.za. I look forward to chatting to you again, Tshiamo.
Same here.
To our viewers, thank you for watching.